The world fell in love with his silence. When Terence Stamp appeared on screen, time seemed to stop. He wasn't just beautiful, he was arresting, as if every glance carried something unspoken. In the 60s, when London pulsed with youth and rebellion, his face became its emblem, perfect, mysterious, untouchable. He gave us The Collector, a performance so controlled it was almost frightening. Then Superman 2, where his calm became power. Yet at the height of it all, when the world waited for more, he walked away. No farewell tour, no fall from grace, just an empty frame where a star had once been. For decades, the question lingered like a rumor. Why did he vanish? Some said heartbreak. Others whispered of enlightenment. But the truth was quieter, a man who traded adoration for anonymity, fame for freedom. He had everything. And then he disappeared. London, 1964. The city was alive with rhythm and rebellion. The Beatles sang of love, art spilled from every wall, and youth ruled the streets. In that revolution of style and spirit, Terence Stamp emerged like a still photograph in motion, composed, magnetic, impossible to look away from. He didn't chase fame. It unfolded around him like light drawn to glass. Born in East London, he carried the quiet dignity of his working-class roots. His performance in Billy Budd revealed something rare purity laced with danger. Critics called him an angel carved from shadow. Then The Collector arrived, and the myth began. A man whose calm could unsettle, whose beauty could wound. Hollywood opened its doors, Fellini wanted him, and the British press named him the face of the decade. He embodied a new masculinity, poised, reflective, untamed by glamour. But as his legend grew, something inside him began to dim. For Terence, fame was never the destination, it was a test. The more the world adored him, the less he recognized himself in its reflection. Behind the lights, a question began to whisper. If beauty is power, what happens when it becomes a prison? Before the world called him beautiful, Terence Stamp was simply a boy from Stepney, a quiet corner of post-war London where ambition felt like fiction. The son of a tugboat worker and a dreamer of a mother, he grew up surrounded by soot, sirens, and the gray hum of the Thames. But even there, he learned to see poetry in silence, in struggle, in small acts of grace. He wasn't the loudest, nor the most confident, but he observed. He watched the way people spoke without words, the way light shifted across faces, lessons that would later make him unforgettable. The cinema was his sanctuary. Sitting alone in the dark, watching Gary Cooper stride across the screen, he realized he didn't want to imitate greatness. He wanted to understand it. After military service, he scraped his way into the Webber Douglas Academy. Broke, hungry, and determined, he caught the attention of Peter Ustinov, who saw in him what no one else could, a storm beneath the stillness. His debut in Billy Budd turned that quiet power into legend. The critics didn't just applaud, they stared, transfixed. From the narrow streets of Stepney to the red carpets of Venice, his rise felt like fate. Yet in every spotlight, there was a shadow that refused to fade. He smiled for cameras, bowed for crowds, but his eyes always looked somewhere else, as if searching for something just beyond the frame. He had become everything he once dreamed of. And yet, even then, he was already learning what dreams can cost. By the mid-60s, Terence Stamp was everywhere and nowhere. His face was on every magazine, his name whispered in every studio corridor. To the public, he was the embodiment of control. Sharp suit, calm eyes, quiet power. To those who knew him, he was beginning to unravel not in scandal, but in spirit. His romance with Jean Shrimpton was the stuff of legend. Together, they were the golden couple of an era intoxicated by its own beauty, the actor and the supermodel, frozen in flashes of light. But love cannot survive under constant exposure. Fame turned their intimacy into a gallery exhibit. Every smile, every silence was captured, sold, and dissected. When the cameras weren't there, the silence between them grew. Shrimpton drifted toward the simplicity she craved, while Stamp began to question everything, his image, his purpose, even his own reflection. "I was a man everyone looked at," he once said, but no one really saw. He became elusive on film sets, searching for truth in lines that no longer moved him. Directors called him distant. Friends called him lost. He began studying meditation, reading philosophy, withdrawing from the parties that once defined him. Fame had given him everything, but it demanded his peace in return. The glamour of the 60s glittered around him, but he moved through it like a ghost, already half gone. In the reflection of every mirror, He saw not a star, but a stranger. The world thought he was withdrawing from them. In truth, he was trying to find himself again. It didn't happen suddenly. There was no scandal, no dramatic goodbye, only a man quietly stepping out of his own mythology. After the mind of Mr. Soames, after Blue, Terence Stamp, the star who once hypnotized cameras, simply stopped showing up. Invitations went unanswered. Phone calls faded into silence. To the public, he had disappeared. To those who knew him, he had gone searching. He boarded a plane east, chasing something no film could offer: stillness. India became his refuge, its heat and dust stripping away the layers fame had built around him. He meditated in temples, walked through crowded markets unnoticed, slept wherever the night found him. He was no longer an actor playing a role, he was a man unlearning one. For a time, he lived without a home, an agent, or even a name that mattered. "I'd been admired," he would later say, "but I wanted to be understood, even if only by myself." Some thought he'd lost his mind. Others said enlightenment had found him. He didn't explain. He simply continued to walk alone, barefoot and free. Years passed, and his name became a ghost in the headlines. The world that once adored him had moved on, but he wasn't mourning the loss. What he'd discovered in the silence was not emptiness, but clarity. He had left behind the noise of applause to hear something truer, the steady heartbeat of a man who had finally stopped performing. The industry called it a disappearance. He called it awakening. When Terence Stamp returned, it was as if he'd emerged from another world, older, leaner, and carrying a silence that demanded attention. The industry had changed. The faces were new, but his presence was still magnetic. He re-entered the screen not as the golden youth he once was, but as something far more compelling, a man who had seen himself from the outside. His comeback in Superman 2 was almost poetic. As General Zod, he radiated control and stillness, the calm of someone who no longer needed to prove anything. "Kneel before Zod," he said, not as a line, but as an echo of his own journey, the voice of someone who had knelt before no one but his own truth. Audiences saw a villain. He was playing a man who had conquered noise. From there, his career became a slow, deliberate rhythm. The Limey, Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, Wall Street, every performance layered with the quiet of years spent outside the spotlight. He no longer chased fame. He allowed it to find him when it needed to. In interviews, he spoke softly, measured, as if each word had been earned through solitude. He called fame a form of possession, and peace the art of letting go. His beauty remained, but it had deepened, no longer sharp, but soulful, like light reflected off water at dusk. He didn't end his story in tragedy, but in choice. No breakdown, no bitterness, just a man who had learned how to leave the room without closing the door behind him. He disappeared once because he had to. He returned because he wanted to. Time never erased him, it only softened the outlines, leaving behind something purer. Terence Stamp became a relic of two worlds: the blazing youth of the 60s and the still wisdom of a man who had walked through his own silence. His legacy was never about excess or tragedy. It was about balance, how to shine without burning, how to vanish without being forgotten. When people revisit The Collector, they see it differently now. The performance once called beautifully cold feels human, almost prophetic. In The Limey, his older self looks back at the man he used to be, and you can feel the years of searching between the frames. His characters grew older, but so did his truth. Younger actors speak of him as a mystery worth decoding. Directors remember how he could command a scene without movement, how every pause carried a pulse. And fans, those who never stopped watching, say his silence was the loudest performance of all. In later interviews, he smiled at the word comeback. "I never left," he said. "I just stopped needing to be seen." That is the essence of his legacy: the courage to disappear, and the grace to return without asking to be remembered. Fame illuminated him. Solitude defined him. Between those two lights, Terence Stamp carved a life few could understand. His story isn't about loss or decline, it's about awakening. He stepped away from the applause not to escape it, but to hear what came after. There are stars who live for the crowd, and others who live for the silence that follows. Stamp belonged to the latter. His beauty drew the world in, but it was his disappearance that made him eternal. He taught us that walking away doesn't mean surrender sometimes. It's the bravest form of survival. In a world obsessed with noise, he became an echo that never faded, a reminder that even in absence, truth endures. He had everything the world could offer, and he left it behind to find something the world could never give. When the light fades, his silence remains. He was the man who dared to disappear, not in defeat, but in discovery. Terence Stamp's story reminds us that sometimes the truest performance happens when the curtain has already fallen. Which version of him stays with you, the dazzling star of the 60s, or the wanderer who found peace in silence? Share your thoughts below, and tell us what you see when the spotlight fades. And remember,